9 a.m. We are meeting in the Senate Finance Room in the State Capitol. Please silence your cell phones. This is Co-Chair Senator von Imhoff, and I'm joined today by Senator Wielechowski, Senator Bishop, Senator Stedman, Senator Hoffman, and Senator Wilson are excused today. We have Carson on the technical, and we've got Allison there as well to my right. We have, I don't see any other senators or representatives in the room. But we do have a quorum to do business. On today's agenda is Senate Bill 115, the motor fuels tax. It's an act relating to the motor fuel tax and providing for an effective date. So I would like to invite Senator Click Bishop and his staff, Darwin Peterson, to present the bill. Please identify yourselves for the record and begin when you are ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair. You ready? Thanks for taking this bill under consideration. And I don't think the last time I've sat here since Senator Stedman was chair of the Capitol budget about 10 years ago. So it's good to be back. Today we have before us Senate Bill 115, the motor fuel tax. Everybody's package is has all the supporting documents, and I'll just take a few moments to give an overview of why. And for several years I've been supporting the motor fuel tax, different variations from the past administration. We need to look no further than our revenue sources book to see that our motor fuel tax receipts are trending down, and why is that? And I'm sure we're all aware by now that with the advent of the increase in CAFE standards for automobiles, the growing use of electric motor vehicles and hybrids, our revenues are trending down. They're going to continue to trend down unless we take some action. I, for one, have had 5 maintenance stations closed in my district, Senate District C. Recently this summer we had another maintenance station close, the Silvertip station down on the Turnigan Arm, and I think we need to stem the tide and increase our motor fuel tax as the bill proposes by 8 cents. We're 50th in the nation. If we double it, we'll be 48th in the nation. And there'll only be 2 states that are lower than us, Maine and Vermont, I believe. I could be wrong, and Darwin will correct me. Another reason for supporting this bill, last year we were in the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Transportation, and the administration came to us and wanted to increment for maintenance and operation to the tune of $800,000. And what's the reason for that? And I just explained to it, because the motor fuel tax receipts are trending down. That didn't happen, and consequently you saw another casualty in a maintenance station closure with Silvertip. People have asked, well, I could support it, Senator, if I knew the money was going to go to the maintenance and operation, and if I could have permission to read. We know we would need a constitutional amendment to do that. I don't have to tell this committee, but those that are listening at home, it would take a constitutional amendment to do that, but I'm just going to make reference to the revenue sources book. And those of us that have been around here for a long time, remaining motor fuel tax revenue is considered designated in the budget process, AS 43.40.010, and it designates motor fuel taxes for specific infrastructure maintenance accounts. So historically, that's where the funds go. We have not only this fund, but we have a track record of other funds throughout the revenue sources book where those funds go. And lastly, in closing, just two more comments at this time. And this will take a meaningful step towards our ability to maintain our roads. And bigger than this, the maintenance is important, but safety should always be number one, number two, number three for the traveling public. And I don't think that we should keep putting the burden on the Department of Transportation, picking and choosing which roads get lighted and which roads don't get lighted, which roads get plowed and which roads don't get plowed in a timely fashion. And lastly is I attended a meeting in Fairbanks with the Alaska Truckers Association, myself and the Interior delegation. It was the most expensive year on record for the transportation industry to fix the maintenance breakdowns on their heavy hauled Class 8 trucks going to Prudhoe Bay. And so with that being said, the last thing is in 1970, the motor fuel tax attributed 6% of our operating budget. 6%. So I don't have the math ran on what that percentage would be today, but I know you don't like this word, Madam Chair, but so I won't say it, but it's just a smidgen. It's not 6% anymore. So with that being said, what would you like to do next?
Well, first I'd like to recognize Senate President Giesel has joined us. You have a PowerPoint, Senator Bishop. Would you like to go through it, or would you like Mr. Peterson to go through it?
Mr. Peterson.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Darwin Peterson, staff to Senator Bishop. Start on page 2 of the PowerPoint, which outlines the history of the motor fuel tax in Alaska. 1945 was the year that Alaska levied its first tax on motor fuels, and that was at 1 cent per gallon. In 1970, that was the year that the motor fuel tax in Alaska was increased for the last time to 8 cents a gallon. It hasn't been changed since then for the last 50 years. 1977 was the last increase to the marine fuel tax, which was to 5 cents a gallon, which is where that tax remains. In 1994, the aviation fuel tax was increased to 4.7 cents a gallon. And September 1st, 2008 through August 31st, 2009, the motor fuel tax was suspended for the only time on all fuel types. And in 2015, House Bill 158 passed the legislature, which added a 9.5% gallon surcharge on motor fuel, and that funding is intended for the Spill Prevention and Response Fund. Madam Chair, just a few points for the committee's consideration on this history slide. 50 years ago, 8 cents a gallon was considered very typical compared to other states in the Union. Since then, however, every other state in the nation has gradually increased its motor fuel tax rates to keep up with inflation, while Alaska has remained frozen in time. After adjusting for inflation, an 8 cent a gallon fuel tax in 1970 would be worth 52 cents today. So in other words, Alaska's fuel tax has lost 82% of its purchasing power in the last 50 years. Moving on to slide 3, the motor fuel tax rates. Currently, highway fuel is 8 cents a gallon. Senate Bill 115 proposes to double that to 16 cents per gallon. Marine fuel is currently 5 cents a gallon, and the legislation proposes to double that to 10 cents a gallon. Aviation fuel is 4.7 cents a gallon, and jet fuel is 3.2 cents a gallon. The legislation does not propose an increase to either one of those two fuel types, So they will remain at 4.7 cents and 3.2 cents a gallon. The reason for that, Madam Chair, why aviation fuel and jet fuel are not proposed, the proposal is not to increase those, is because we currently have a more competitive position among other states for those fuel types. We're in the middle to top third ranking in the rest of the states for aviation fuel and jet fuel. So since highway fuel and marine fuel were the last in the nation, the sponsor of the bill made the decision that it's prudent to increase those two motor fuel tax types, but not increase aviation fuel and jet fuel. It's also important to point out that those two fuel types have special restrictions on them by the FAA. They can only be used for airport maintenance and airport improvements. So, off-road use refund currently is at 6 cents a gallon. So if you buy motor fuel that's intended for use off-road, like in snow machines or four-wheelers, you can submit a refund to the department for 6 cents a gallon. Since we're proposing to double the highway fuel tax, we also are proposing to double the refund amount to 12 cents a gallon.
So just pausing there, do we have any questions on the slide from members? Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Maybe we can get an idea how many people actually apply for these refunds and the bureaucratic cost of the overhead relative to the financial impact. I'm sure it's different with around all regions of the state, but it'd be interesting to know what the cost-benefit trade-off between the two is.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Stedman, I don't have that information in front of me, but I will certainly collect that information from the Department of Revenue and have it available to the committee at the next hearing.
So I have a quick question myself. Thank you. You had mentioned earlier, Senator Bishop had mentioned earlier, our ranking with our current versus proposed at 50th versus somewhere in the high 40s. What might be helpful is just to see a bar graph of all 50 states and kind of showing where we are now with a colored bar, and then where we could potentially move to the left there with the proposed, just to kind of see our rankings among our peers. And then the second thing is the aviation fuel, and particularly the jet fuel, being held constant. I just want to reiterate your comments of maintaining competitiveness here in Alaska, particularly since we are growing in UPS and FedEx and Amazon and so forth, with the e-commerce being situated that we are, that it is important that we maintain our competitive advantage. And then one thing, of course, that is not represented here is that I do believe that we have something unique in Alaska called the uplift charge that does increase the cost of the jet fuel taxes. That's not necessarily, goes more towards the local jurisdiction versus statewide, but it is present and it is material. So I just wanted to state that. Thank you. Oh, Senator Wielkowski.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, so Anchorage has a gas tax, I think it's 10 cents. And I'm just curious how that, when you add that, do many other states have local community taxes as well? I'm just curious how that sort of changes our ranking, if at all.
Yeah, through the chair, Senator Wielkowski, thanks for that question. In one of my further slides, I've got a slide on competitiveness. And at that point, I intended to discuss this, but since you brought up the question, I'll mention it now, that when you look at other states, I've got documentation that I can provide to the committee, which I'll do after this hearing, that shows each state what they charge as their base excise state tax rate for motor fuel, as well as other state fees and local taxes. So when we say that by increasing our motor fuel tax to 16 cents a gallon for highway and 10 cents a gallon for marine, one important point to consider is most other states don't separate marine fuel and highway fuel. So marine fuel is taxed at the same rate as highway fuel for most states. So we would still be the lowest in the nation for marine fuel. Highway fuel at 16 cents a gallon would bring us to 48th in the nation, with New Jersey and Vermont being higher, but that's just the base excise tax rate. So when you look at the local county taxes as well as other state fees, they're still much higher than ours. So even if we take into consideration the local tax in Anchorage, for example, New Jersey, they have a 10.5 cent base excise tax rate on motor fuel, but they have 30.9 cents in other state fees and local taxes. So the total for New Jersey is 41.4 cents a gallon. So still much higher than ours. So in essence, we would still be the lowest in the nation by doubling our motor fuel tax when you take into consideration the local taxes. Vermont is 12.1 cents a gallon for their base state excise tax, but they have 18.71 cents a gallon in other state fees and local taxes for a total of 30.81 cents a gallon in Vermont. And I've got that documentation for every state. It's obviously a 50-page document, but if the committee wishes, I can submit that to the committee so you can see what every other state has as far as other state taxes and fees and local taxes on their motor fuel.
So thank you. I think 50 pages probably, unless the committee would like to leaf through 50 pages, I think what could be helpful is one-page table that has all 50 states, their base statewide excise tax, their local taxes on top of that. And I know that the local taxes may differ, but it's, I guess pick an average and then do a total on the far right-hand column. A table would be nice. I have seen them when I was researching this particular bill. I know that they're out there in graphical form. Again, with the bar graph, you can do the base excise tax in one color, the additional local tax on another color, and you can see where we stand. I think 1 to 2 page document, especially if we want quick understanding of where we are ranked and to get support for this bill, I think something like that would be really helpful. Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I got a couple of, just one point and I guess one discussion item. When we deal with the marine fuel tax, which is kind of separate than highways, over a decade ago, the legislature made a policy and put forward to basically privatize or put to the communities the harbor system, which was our big cost dealing with fishing vessels and sport boats. And those harbors have mostly been turned over to the communities and rebuilt. So when we increase whatever the dollar amount is, projection for the marine fuel tax, I would question the need or how it's going to be implemented back into the user group. Clearly, when you take a look at the highway miles of commercial trucks or highway fuel for commercial trucks or non-commercial vehicles, the target is road maintenance of various forms. But I think the committee should consider the need and impact on the marine fuel, because we have pretty much moved that maintenance issue onto the communities. And in building their harbors, rebuilding their harbors to get financial support from the state, they had to create if they hadn't already created, sinking funds and other mechanisms, enterprise funds, separate for those watching at home, separate from the general fund in the local communities, the harbor system. And in doing so, create a sinking fund mechanism for replacement and maintenance, and never come back to the state for replacements of that particular harbor in the future. In other words, we'll help them build a new harbor, but we're not going to go back 30 years from now and rebuild that harbor. We're always going to be moving forward, building new infrastructure, not repairing old infrastructure. So they're responsible. So I'd question the need for that. And then if we can revert to the, Madam Chairman, the road maintenance portion, I think it's pretty hard to put forward an argument on the table that we don't need more funds for roads. So I would agree with that on maintenance. My concern there is the money ends up going to roads maintenance, but in the creation of the forward budgets, an equal amount is removed from general funds, and the net benefit is potentially zero. And the last time this particular subject was before the legislature, that was the testimony, as I recall, there was going to be no net increase to DOT. So somehow, if we go forward with this tax, we need to be assured that it's an additive, not just a supplemental, not a supplemental additive, but supplementing other funds. Otherwise, we have no maintenance net gain on our highways. So that's something that the legislature needs to be very careful with, because as forward budgets materialize in the future, it'd be very easy to give the motor fuel tax a haircut and put us in a position of no net gain. So I'd like to have some thought of the committee and the sponsor put in that, how we ensure that this tax goes to its intended purposes, which is increase our maintenance, not hold it constant and just supplement it, what's already being spent.
Thank you, Senator Sidman. Senator Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Peterson, as you look at the off-road use for the refund that's there, and I can see how it's applied to snow machines and four-wheelers and those kind of things, the off-road vehicles. Is there something there for a relief for those people that live throughout the state of Alaska, not just in rural areas, but where they don't have harbors, boat slips, and boat ramps to maintain? It's especially out in rural Alaska. Is there a refund for those people that are buying gasoline for their outboard motor for that as well?
Through the chair, Senator Olson, no, there's no relief for marine fuel tax that's purchased in rural communities. So that's something that we can work with you on if it's something that you'd like to see. But in the legislation right now, the off-road use refund is currently in statute at in AS 4340030A, and that's just for highway fuel that's purchased for off-road. It explicitly does not include marine fuel or aviation fuel.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So that would require a change in the statute. Yeah. And I'll also mention, because the sponsor reminded me, that in regulation, the Department of Revenue does offer a refund for large mines that buy bulk fuel. I believe it's 3 cents a gallon. They can submit a refund to the department, and I'll double check that number to make sure I'm giving you the correct information.
Senator Bishop.
Madam Chair, and I think to Darwin's point, I think they could submit that quarterly, but I'm going off of memory, so I'm looking for my lifeline here.
That's correct, through the chair.
So we are not planning on moving this bill today, so there will be an opportunity for the two of you to come back, if you wish, with clarifying information. Okay, if we have no further questions on this particular slide, we can move forward.
Madam Chair, the next slide, slide 4, is just a rough estimate, kind of back of the napkin math that we put together to show an impact on the average Alaska consumer with the increase in this tax. We took numbers that we got from the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities on the number of registered passenger vehicles in Alaska, and that's just cars and trucks only, does not include motorcycles, since motorcycles get high miles per gallon and don't drive nearly as many miles as cars and trucks do, so we didn't want to skew the data. So excluding motorcycles, there are approximately 654,826 registered cars and trucks, passenger cars and trucks in Alaska. We used the Kelly Blue Book estimate of an average mile per year for a vehicle at 15,000 miles, which we think is possibly a little high, but maybe not for like the Matsu commuter, for example. So if we take the average miles per year per vehicle at 15,000 miles, average miles per gallon, this data also came from the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. They estimate an average of 24.2 miles per gallon for cars and 17.5 miles per gallon for trucks. So adding those two together and dividing by 2 gives us 20.85 miles per gallon as just a rough average. And then if we do the math, gallons of fuel per year, 15,000 average miles per year times 20.85 gallons of mileage equals 719 gallons of fuel per year purchased for an average vehicle. And so the average annual cost per vehicle would be 719 miles times the additional 8 cents. So that equals $57.52 is a rough estimate of what that would cost the average consumer with the increase. So the total would be $114 or $115.04 for the 16 cents, but on this slide we're just showing what the average cost would be due to the additional tax proposed in Senate Bill 115 at $57 a year.
Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think one of the things we always struggle with here is fairness around the state to all our constituents, no matter if they're out in rural or in urban or they're living on islands. But there seems to be quite an interest in a clear directional change away from piston-fired engines to electrical cars. And some of the communities are further ahead than others. But how do we get and instill a fairness so all vehicles are sharing the burden on the maintenance issue? So what thought has been put into making the electric cars pay their fair share, and how would we implement that if that was in fact the case?
Through the chair, Senator Stedman, thank you for that question. We have thought about this a lot, and we do have a draft committee substitute that I was going to mention at the end of this presentation, but since you brought it up, I'll mention it now, that we would like the co-chairs to consider allowing the sponsor to introduce and adopt at possibly a future committee hearing of the Senate Finance Committee. And that draft committee substitute has 2 things. One is obviously a needed effective date change to July 1, 2020, because the current version of the bill was from last year, had an effective date of July 1, 2019. In addition to the effective date change, we would like to propose increasing the registration fee for electric vehicles. In our research, looking at what other states do, many other states have an additional registration fee for electric vehicles that we think is probably the best way to capture needed funds from those vehicles that still provide wear and tear on our roads but don't pay fuel tax because they don't go to the pump. So looking at what other states do and also looking at what the average impact would be to the Alaska consumer from the increase in the motor fuel tax, our proposal that we would like the committee to consider is increasing the biennial registration fee for electric vehicles. Currently in statute, everybody pays $100 biennially for a registration fee for your vehicle. We would like to propose an additional $100 biennially for an electric vehicle, which would equate to $50 per year, which is pretty fair. It's actually lower than what you would pay as a motorist who is driving an internal combustion engine, because you're paying $114 per year on average. So it's about half of what a motorist would pay. But we thought that was fair, doubling the registration fee for electric vehicles. And then hybrid vehicles that use gas and electric, we are going to propose to the committee that we increase the biennial registration fee by $50 for hybrids, since they're half gas and they do pay some motor fuel tax. So our rough numbers, According to 2018 data that I received from Division of Motor Vehicles, there are approximately 28,000 electric vehicles in Alaska, and of that 28,000, 8,000 are pure all-electric vehicles, and about 20, rough numbers, about 20,000 are hybrid vehicles. So if we add an additional $100 biannual registration fee for all electric vehicles and $50 for hybrid vehicles, the rough numbers that we estimate should generate approximately $900,000 per year. But it's important to note that according to the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities, they estimate that by the year 2025, the fleet of vehicles in Alaska should be 10% electric. So by 2025, that additional registration fee should result in about approximately $4 million a year in additional revenue. And that's our proposal for capturing the electric vehicles that provide wear and tear on the roads but don't pay motor fuel tax.
So thank you for that explanation. So it is important that if we are going to be switching out or trading combustible vehicles to hybrid or full electric, is the money captured on registration? How much will that be replacing the $57 per year? You don't have to answer that now. It's just something to think about. Just make sure that the numbers do reflect the change from one payment system to another. So you had mentioned a CS. Again, yes, we'd like to see this bill again in the future, but I think we'd also like to hear from our other committee members if they have an amendment or suggestion as well that makes sense to fold into the CS as well. So it may be subject to change what you have right now, and we'll just kind of wait and let things develop over time. Are there any other questions from committee members on this particular slide? Okay, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Slide 5 provides information on the comparison to other states. In part, in response to Senator Wielechowski's question, I've already mentioned a lot of this, but Alaska currently has the lowest tax rate on highway fuel and marine fuel of any state. And as I mentioned, marine rate is the same as highway rate in most other states. With the passage of Senate Bill 15, Alaska would still remain well below the national average, moving from 50th to 48th. But as I mentioned, that data is skewed when you take into consideration other state fees and local taxes in other states, such as New Jersey and Vermont, when you look at their base excise tax rate compared to what the additional fees and local taxes that are charged. And then, as I mentioned, on jet fuel and aviation fuel, Alaska currently has a more competitive ranking for those two fuel types, ranking 36th in the nation for jet fuel and 40th in the nation for aviation fuel. And as the co-chair said, taking into consideration the importance to our economy of the Ted Stevens International Airport and all the shipping that's done through there, we figured that that was a pretty competitive position to stay at. Oops. Sorry, were there any questions on that slide? Thank you, Madam Chair. That concludes this portion of the presentation. Whenever the committee desires to bring this bill back, I'll have additional slides that the co-chair requested, as well as answers to the questions that the committee asked today. And if there are any further questions, we'd be happy to entertain them or provide the answers at a future hearing.
So we'll be taking questions here, but I would like you eventually to go through the sectional, please, too. Okay, Senator Wielechowski.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned there was by regulation a 3-cent refund for minors, and I'd be curious to get some information about how much that is costing us.
Senator Bishop.
Could I also include our civil, heavy, and highway contractors that are used? They would come under that as well.
Great. So do we have any questions about the intent of the bill before we go into the sectional? Nope. So Mr. Peterson, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The version of the bill you have before you in Section 1 of the bill, this changes the per gallon tax rates for qualified dealers for 2 categories of motor fuel. Highway fuel and gasohol is increased from 8 cents a gallon to 16 cents a gallon, and marine fuel is increased from 5 cents a gallon to 10 cents a gallon. Section 2 of the bill changes the per gallon tax rate for users for two categories of motor fuel, highway fuel and gasohol from 8 cents to 16 cents, and marine fuel from 5 cents to 10 cents. Section 3 of the bill changes the refund for non-road use of taxed motor fuel from 6 cents a gallon to 12 cents a gallon. Section 4 of the bill provides transition language allowing for the Department of Revenue to adopt regulations. Section 5 of the bill provides for an immediate effective date for Section 4, the transitional regulation section. And Section 6 of the bill provides for a July 1, 2019 effective date for all other provisions of the bill. And as I mentioned in a forthcoming CS, we'll amend that effective date to July 1, 2020, if that's the committee's wish.
Any questions? Okay, so we have a fiscal note on this, but we're going to wait to hear those in just a moment instead. If we don't have any further questions for the bill sponsor, I would like to take public testimony. We do have several people off net. Do we have anybody signed up here in the room at all? I don't see anybody in the room. I'm going to check and see. Okay. So, Senator Bishop. Yes.
I do have a question.
Senator Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you look at some of the states we keep comparing ourselves to, they seem to be back east, and last time I was back east, there was a fair amount of toll roads that you had to go in and take care of. And there's no toll roads here in the state of Alaska. I was wondering how that fed into the information and the amount of revenue that was going to be coming through our state related to road maintenance. I guess my real concern is that if you're going to go ahead and start having a higher tax, and I'm not saying you're not justified in doing it, is that getting us closer to having a toll road as well? I'd like to hear your comments on what that has to do.
I'll take a stab at your question, and I'd have to research it to validate what I'm going to say, but I believe toll roads are built with private funds. So this just applies, right, because all our roads are public transportation routes here in the state, and I you're absolutely right. I was in Washington D.C. here a month ago, and I encountered several toll roads, but I believe they're all privately funded, and but we can research that question and give you an analytical answer, Senator Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, to the Chair, Senator Olson, we'll do that research to see whether toll roads are private or public. But I do know that in the information that I mentioned, like states like New Jersey and Vermont that have a lot of other state fees and local taxes, that's just on motor fuel at the pump. It doesn't include toll fees. So that is an additional fee that a lot of other states pay that Alaska doesn't have.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So thank you. So I'd like to move into public testimony. So Senator Bishop, you're more than welcome to come back to your normal seat if you wish. And so we have folks here in the audience that also would like to come up, as well as folks on the phone. So we're going to start off with, I'm going to go ahead and open public testimony. So we're now open public testimony for SB115. Testimony will be limited to 2 minutes. I don't have a calculator, but hopefully my justice staff will help me find one. So right now we've got several people. We have Mr. Joe Michael or Joe Michelle with the Alaska Trucking Association. Mr. Michelle, if you can hear us, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing ATA to testify on this bill. For the record, my name is Joe Michelle, Executive Director of the Alaska Trucking Association, a statewide organization that is representing the trucking interests in Alaska from Barrow to Ketchikan for over 60 years. We would really like to thank the sponsor of this bill who reached out to our organization during the interim, and in addition attended our January board meeting to directly address concerns of our members. The ATA board will be meeting early March to formally take up the fuel tax issue. But in the past, ATA has supported a fuel tax increase, and has maintained its support, provided that the money raised goes to the maintenance of roads and bridges that the Alaskans are driving on every day. We really look forward to working with the sponsor of this legislation as it goes through the legislative process. But as of right now, ATA is going to vote in March to formally take it up. And in the past, we've always supported a fuel tax because those Alaskan roads are eating up my folks' equipment fairly hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Michelle, for your testimony. We have, Alicia Sierra, and then on deck after Alicia will be Mr. Mike Coons. So Alicia, the Alaska Associated General Contractors of Alaska. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Alicia Sierra, and I'm the Executive Director of the Associated General Contractors of Alaska. AGC is the largest construction trade association in the state, representing more than 630 Alaska contractors, specialty contractors, highway contractors, suppliers, manufacturers, and businesses in Alaska. I'm testifying today on their behalf to express our strong support for SB115. The last time Alaska updated its motor fuel tax rates was 50 years ago in 1970, as you heard in your presentation today. For a long time, Alaska has had the lowest motor fuel tax rate increases, the lowest motor fuel tax rates in the nation, and this increase will only change that ranking slightly. Adjusting Alaska's motor fuel tax rates will take a meaningful and reasonable step toward our ability to fund the state's backlog of transportation infrastructure and maintenance needs, along with improving our state's general fiscal stability. This increase is good for our industry and good for Alaska. It will have a positive effect on our businesses, the families we employ, and the safety of Alaskans who depend on the infrastructure we build and maintain. AGC has long supported a fuel tax increase, and we really appreciate the leadership of Senator Bishop on this issue and the opportunity to testify today in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia, for your testimony. We have Mr. Mike Coons up for 2 minutes, and then after that will be Chris Ekenlob. So, Mr. Coons, you're up.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. This is Mike Coons. I'm the president of the Greater Alaska chapter of AMAC. We have 280 members just within my chapter alone, 7,300 across the state. I've sent an email to the Senate Finance Committee and to the members opposing the SB 115. And I won't go into a lot of that. You can read it for yourself. But a couple of things I was listening to the presentations. It was kind of laughable when they brought up about the hybrids and electric cars. And you got an electric car that's running $100,000, a $57 increase in registration is kind of silly. Although in Washington State with a hybrid situation, what they did there was they raised their fuel oil tax there. But then when the hybrids kicked in, people started driving less. Then they started getting less money coming into the coffers. So now they're doing a mileage. They're wanting to do a mileage tax. So is that next thing down the line? There was talk about a bar graph. Would you like to see? I'd like to see a bar graph that's cost per gallon of gas and diesel in other states and how this will impact that. I mean, right now, I think only 2 states above us was California and Hawaii, my guess. And then Senator Bishop brought up at the very start about a constitutional amendment. Yes, I agree. I think what we need to do is have a constitutional amendment first that then would say any sin taxes, including fuel taxes, which is a sin tax, that money would be actually designated to where it's supposed to be. If we do that, if we get that constitutional amendment first, and then the Alaskan people vote on that up or down, then and only then could we be talking about any increases in the fuel bill tax, alcohol tax, cigarette tax, whatever you want to, sin taxes you want to do. And then lastly, $57 increase was what the presenter said. Well, $57 when you're working, when you're in the poor, you're a poor person. When you're a person that's a lot of the people up at Toke, Mr. Bishop, seniors are making $1,220 a month, and that's total. So and that's having to deal with their fuel. That's having to deal
Mr.
with.
Mr. Coons, can you wrap it up, please? Can you please give us a closing statement?
We oppose this, and we will continue to oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Mr. Chris Eichenlob, followed by Patrick Mulligan. So Chris.
For the record, this is Chris Eichenlob calling from Eagle River, Alaska. You copy me good?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to oppose SB 115 for many reasons, but this is a way of kind of like nickel and diming the private sector, you know, and I oppose that. So we have, like the caller before me said, you know, we have, from my figures, the second highest fuel prices in the nation. I'd like to see that on the slide as well. You know, for full disclosure, we need to show, you know, how much the tax is. You know, I know we want to be number one at something, all right? And maybe this tax will put us there, and, you know, Senator Bishop there can put a little feather in his cap. But I'm opposed to it, and, you know, as one of your members once said, you know, this is kind of a money grab, and it really doesn't solve anything, and we need real solutions. And the public sector, you know, has been paying their fair share for quite some time, or the private sector. So I think it's time for the public sector to pick up some of the load here. And I think one of the ways of doing that would probably be, you know, to repeal SB 26 and actually, you know, get some real solutions here. And since my senator's been benched from Eagle River, and I think you know what I'm talking about, you know, it feels like we got schoolyard bullies trying to bully the, you know, with a special interest. They're almost like you guys are lobbyists in there for the special interest, and we feel like we're being shaken down for our school lunch by the school bullies, you know, and this amount ain't really going to solve anything. Let's get down to it, and let's go for the real money, and let's get something done. And thank you. You have any questions for me?
Thank you, Mr. Eichenlob. Thank you very much for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Peace out.
Okay, next up we have Mr. Patrick Mulligan, followed by Herman Morgan. So, Mr. Patrick, you're up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senators. My name is Patrick Mulligan. I'm the Director of Supply Chain Management for Petromarine Services. We're a major fuel distributor in Southeast Alaska with tank farms and fuel docks in 7 communities in the region. I'm testifying in opposition to the proposed marine fuel tax increase. Virtually all towns, large and small, in Southeast Alaska have an economic base that is dependent on maritime activity. Businesses with tour boats, charter boats, tugboats, barges, marine container vessels, watercraft transportation companies, and the fishing industry are the economic lifeblood of most of those communities. Sales of fuel to the fishing industry will be particularly impacted by any increase to the marine fuel tax. At present, many fishing companies are Seattle-based, yet fish in Alaska. Washington State has no marine fuel tax, so fuel is typically less costly when purchased in the Pacific Northwest. The prevailing practice for fishing companies is to load up on fuel before transiting to Alaska, then purchase the minimum amount of product needed to conduct their work and get back to Seattle. Taxes do impact purchasing behaviors in Washington, and the Washington-Alaska tax dynamic is a clear illustration of this fact. Clearly, this translates into resellers of marine fuel already being disadvantaged relative to Washington state suppliers. An increase in the Alaska marine fuel tax will do little more than compound that problem and create an even greater imbalance. In the end, giving the price sensitivity to the product, less marine fuel will be sold in Alaska. It is also worth noting that towns and companies that levy sales taxes on marine fuels will end up collecting less, not more revenue, also adversely affecting their local budgets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mulligan. We actually have a question from Senator Stedman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I see the call-in is Mr. Mulligan from Petromarine Services and referenced Southeast Alaska, but when I look at the marine fuel tax, I think of Dutch Harbor, a massive fishing fleet and biggest harbor as far as servicing, you know, that industry. And I was wondering if you had any comments in that direction, because if I'm not mistaken, Petromarine, one of its starting ports for the company was Dutch Harbor when they expanded into it.
Yes, sir, you're 100% right. You know, the the same principle that applies and the same dynamic that applies to Southeast Alaska. I mean, it might even apply more so to Western Alaska and Unalaska in particular, just given the volume and the size of the fishing fleet in that region. The only reason I left it out is because, as you noted, although we did have an initial presence in Dutch Harbor, we divested of that portion of our company quite some time ago, and our focus as far as the fishing fleet goes is mostly in South Central and Southeast Alaska. But the point still stands. I think every community in Alaska that depends on the fishing fleet for a significant portion of their economic activity and revenue stands to lose out if more of these companies and large vessels end up fueling up in Washington State and avoiding Alaska fuel docks and Alaskan communities.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Mulligan. We have Mr. Herman Morgan up, and then we have David Neese on deck. So, Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yes. Just talk slow, please.
Yeah, I'm calling to vehemently oppose this tax. I'm sure in Alaska, the gas is over $60 a gallon. It costs about $120 to fill up your truck, and yet you were to increase the price, and that guy is right all of a sudden saying we live on a fixed income, and to add more, make us pay more for fuel in the state that's awash in petroleum. It just doesn't make sense. Kind of sad to see Mike Sauer not there anymore. Seems like most of the conservative people here are being removed from these committees who are telling you guys got to cut the budget. You guys already took away most of our permanent fund and now you're going to take more. You know, we've lost our representation on these committees where most of the decisions are made. And it really affects us out here. You know, you guys can tell we're trying to find money by raising taxes. You guys cut the budget. 44% of your budget goes to education, and what they call that healthcare. It seems like them education lobbyists, they got you under their thumb. You have the worst test scores in the nation, and all you can do is raise more money from the poor people to give these people who make $200,000 a year. Something's very wrong in the state and the way it's being run. You guys blew for $14 billion, and now you want more money to spend without cutting the budget. You guys got to get out of the control of this majority caucus rule thing. It's destroying our state because one person has the power and they can remove people who say cut the budget from their committees. Alaska is going to collapse under all these taxes. Countries that have fallen from tax. Our state is being invaded.
Mr. Morgan, can you just wrap up your comments about the bill itself, please?
Don't raise taxes. Don't cut the budget. Stop listening to special interests and the dictates of the majority caucus. It's destroying Alaska financially and morally.
Okay, thank you very much. We have David Neese, I think, followed by Vicki Kennedy here in Juneau. So, David?
Yeah, hey, David Neese. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you, yes.
All right, thank you. I was reading through the documents on the bill, and I want to thank Senator Bishop for bringing this up. It's a good idea to examine your tax base. The big problem that you're working against is information. Some of the things that need to be in there is the American Petroleum Institute's state-by-state analysis of all income from motor fuel taxes, not just the tax itself, but its impact. They did a January study that's available online, answers the question more along the line of what is everything all brought in as far as taxes for motor fuel transportation. I have a summer job where I work for one of the motor coach divisions of a cruise line. They do a lot of taxes. And when Anchorage instituted its motor fuel tax at a local level, they immediately went out and got a bigger fuel tank and bought their fuel outside and brought it up here and shipped it because that was cheaper. So as you're looking at this tax, you need to look at two things. You need to look at the last time you increased it, what was it supposed to be due, and then an analysis from ICER on what it actually ended up doing. You need to look at it as an economic report. In other words, yes, it's going to bring in more revenue, but what does it cost you? Does it impact all of your rural schools that heat with diesel fuel? Does it impact your prison and sewer? Does it heat with diesel fuel? What's it going to do to the southeast communities that get their fuel barged in? That's missing in the information to make a good, sound judgment on whether it's good or not. And you need to make sure that in the bill, if it does go out of there, that it has a statement in there that this is a dedicated fund. The intent is to have it go towards road and maintenance, but as you know, all the income coming in goes into the general fund, and they are either undesignated or designated. So the language of the bill needs to say that it is a dedicated fund for road maintenance and repair. That's all I got.
Okay. Thank you, David. We appreciate it. So the next person we have is Vicki Kennedy. It says here in Juneau. Are you on the phone, Vicki?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Through the chair and under the table. Vicki Jo Kennedy here. My home is still Kodiak Island, but I'm here in Juneau for going on 2.5 years. Anyway, I am totally opposed to SB115 because, like many callers in front of me said, it is going after more money from everybody's pocket. It's not going to be fair. And I am talking about people in Mr. Olson's district, especially with their snow machines and everything else. But I've got some ideas. He brought up the toll road. I grew up in a state where we had plenty of toll roads for bridges and everything else, and they aren't always private. That's a dang good idea. As a matter of fact, we could put one at every entry point in the state, including vessel entries. Coming through the Dixon Strait. I think that's a great idea, Senator Olson. And then another thing, make the federal government pay more. They are exempt from a lot of taxes on every site, and since they still own 65% of the land in this state, they could pay more. And they do have to be dedicated funds. They have to be. And then one tax that I did not hear with all this fuel being mentioned, what about taxing rocket fuel? I didn't hear that being mentioned, and boy, they suck up an awful lot of it over there on Kodiak, and then they blow them up and spray it all over the place. So let's tax the KLC rocket fuel. You know where I stand on that. As a matter of fact, let's just sell the whole site. That still sucks $2 million a year out of this state that I can track down just in salaries alone, plus the upkeep. We have a buyer. And that would be SpaceX. They are willing to buy this site if this state is willing to give it up. We don't need to be paying salaries and pensions for people who only work there 10 years, and they get a pension. So let's do away with this fuel tax for everybody, especially on the highways. And hey, the toll road, I love it. Everybody pays. And God forbid we need an income tax.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kennedy, for your testimony. We appreciate it. Thank you. I want to go to the room now. We have Mary Soroki with the Department of Transportation. But Mary, what we may do is have you go in a bit, if that's okay. Okay. And then we'll have Nils Andresen, if you'd like to step up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Nils Andreasen. I'm the Executive Director of the Alaska Municipal League. And we respond to the needs of 165 cities and boroughs in the state. AML members are aware of the critical needs that Alaska's communities are experiencing. And we understand that current local and state revenues are insufficient to meet the needs of residents and support economic development. While AML members have voted in support of broad-based revenue measures to be considered at the state level, at our annual meeting in November of last year, members also voted in support of SB115, an increase to the state's motor fuel tax. We recognize that the motor fuel tax has not increased for some time, and more importantly, has not kept pace with changes in behavior, inflationary pressures, and increased need. Municipal budgets, if you looked at their totality,
They're trying to spend a dollar, I guess, out of the government and government accountability.
Members have voted in support of broad-based revenue measures to be considered at the state level. At our annual meeting in November of last year, members also voted in support of SB115, an increase to the state's motor fuel tax. We recognize that the motor fuel tax has not increased for some time, and more importantly, has not kept pace with changes in behavior, inflationary pressures, and increased need. Municipal budgets, if you looked at their totality, they have top 3 expenditures. Those are education, public safety, and then transportation and public works. And when I look at capital improvement needs of local governments across the state, I can point to nearly $3 billion in needs. So very definitely we view SB 115 less as a revenue bill and more as an attempt and really a best effort by the state to help to address the needs in our community. When I look at the API national average for motor fuel taxes, combining state, local, and federal, the national average is 54.3 cents a gallon. Alaska is ranked bottom at 32.6. And the question earlier that Senator Wilikowski brought up about local fuel taxes is included in those numbers. So you've got about 20 cents per gallon to consider. To Senator Stedman's point about how to put back into some of these funds back into the user groups, I think that's an excellent conversation to have and encourage this body to take that up, both in terms of how these funds are designated, but mainly ensuring that they go back to maintenance of our roads and public infrastructure, reducing the transaction costs for residents and businesses. And I know that in the statute for aviation, some of that fuel tax is shared with municipal governments. And I also note that in F of 434010, there's a conversation about water and harbor facilities, but no mention of the ferry system or the marine highway system, which is referenced in G of that statute. So really looking forward to that conversation and being part of this as a long-term fiscal plan for the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We're going to move to the Fairbanks LIO with Mr. Clark Milne, and then after that we'll go back onto OffNet. So, Mr. Milne, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Thank you.
And thank you for letting me testify this morning. I'll be brief, I hope. I've been following fuel tax for quite a while. Civil engineer and have been in Alaska 40 years working with roads, transportation, aviation, highways, and both at the DOT for 15 of those years, although I've retired and I don't speak for DOT now. I've also been with the Fairbanks Chamber, which the Transportation Committee there has been very pro, trying to increase our gas taxes, our fuel taxes, motor fuel taxes. I don't speak for them this morning. 2 points that I think are worth touching on. The facts are well represented in the PowerPoint that was presented by Mr. Peterson, and Senator Bishop touched on a number of key points, and one of those that people need to be touchy about and aware is the point of designation versus dedication. I do not want to get into the tangle of trying to have a constitutional amendment and dedication because it's not necessary. As was specifically cited by Senator Bishop, the path is that it is internally designated and has been for 30 or 40 years. Part of the point there is that if there were more funds generated or revenue taken in than was the expenditures, then maybe you'd have to decide what to do, but we're not even close to that. It was evaluated when this was brought up 4 or 5 years ago that we're in the range. If you multiply per that PowerPoint, you'd end up potentially being able to raise as much as an additional $35 or $40 million. And we're in arrears in terms of we're only now, gas tax only pays for somewhere in the range of 20% of the costs, the current depleted costs and expenditures on maintenance. So as a maintenance director and then a maintenance engineer at DOT Northern Region, not speaking for them now, I'm retired now, I think it's crucial that we try to get more funds and join the rest of the United States in having fuel taxes help pay for maintenance to a higher degree. It's quite appropriate. I think we need to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Melny, for your testimony. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to go back to OffNet, and we have Bert Huddling, followed by Sheila Shaz. So, Mr. Bert, you're up.
Hi, my name is Bert Hufftelling. I'm calling to testify today about the House or Senate Bill 115. I completely disagree with taxing Alaskans more for the gas tax and doubling the current tax rate that you currently have. We've seen the results of what happens when Mayor Berkowitz and the Assembly in Anchorage decided to raise their gas tax by 10%, by 10 cents. And currently we're seeing it as for places, people that live in other places around the state. I myself used to travel and wait to get to Anchorage to be able to purchase my gas because it was cheaper there. Now I currently buy it in my own hometown because it's costs me less here than it does to purchase it there. Making this gas tax double what it currently is going to increase my cost per year anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 a year that I will end up having to pay more out of my own pocket just to cover my bills for this gas tax. I suggest and I recommend that we vote no for the gas tax bill and completely eliminate it from this year's process. It's pennies in comparison to deregulating the regulations that are preventing businesses like Pebble Mine from opening, getting our logging industry going, other things along the lines of the fishing industry, getting the oil production going. We got places in Kaktovik that would love to be able to get their oil industry and get wells pumping up there, bringing in their own revenue instead of living off of the state's coffers like they do. Again, I recommend that we vote no for this tax bill SB115. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huddling. For your testimony, we have Sheila Shaz from Wasilla Online. Sheila, you are up.
Hello, I'm Sheila Shaz. I'm definitely against this motor fuel gas tax. The way we commute in Alaska, the way the taxes have increased the last couple of years, insurances have increased, PFDs, they're trying to wipe out, education, safety, transportation. That'd be great if that was covered. I think that they can do a lot better in regards to fixing our budget without taxing the people who live here, the Alaskans. We don't need this motor fuel gas tax. I'm totally against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila, for your testimony. We have Mr. Adam Hakes from Homer.
Hey, my name is Adam Hikes from Homer, Alaska. I represent myself and my wife, and I am against this tax. I don't think you can put money back into people's pockets through dedicated or designated funds, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. It's just wordplay. How are you going to give money back to people when you're taking it out of their back pocket? This tax, I don't support any new taxes until the legislation gets the budget balanced like we elected the governor to do. So I'm against this tax, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Hikes. Next we're going to go back up to the Homer LIO. We have Wes Humbird.
Yeah, thank you. I'm against the marine fuel tax for one reason. I've been a commercial fisherman in Cook Inlet for 52 years, and my boat burns 225 to 250 gallons of fuel in a 12-hour fishing period. And I'd like to know, what you keep talking about maintenance. What kind of maintenance are you going to do on the water for me? Are you going to go out and smooth the water down so I have a flat piece of water to fish on during the day? I'm definitely against this fuel tax. We already have a 25-cent sales tax on our fuel at Homer. In Homer, with the city, you add more money on top of that, it just gets completely extreme. I'd appreciate it if this was voted down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humbird. We're going to move back to OffNet. We have Colleen Bigot. Colleen with Palmer.
Hi there. I'm against this tax. For one thing, the majority of the people are getting older. I don't even drive 5,000 miles a year. My husband doesn't either. We're both disabled. And you guys got to quit taxing people so hard up here because we're not going to tolerate it. It's not right. We put you there for the people, not against the people. budget your balance. That's what you have brains for. Thank you. I'm against the bill.
Thank you, Colleen, for your testimony. Do we have anyone in the room that would like to testify? Mary, I'll get to you in a bit. Anyone online? Nope. Public testimony is closed. Okay, so we have the following people available for questions. We have Brandon Spanos, the Deputy Director of the Tax Division, Department of Revenue, and we have Mary, is it Soroki, with the Department of Transportation. I would like Mary to come up now because we do have a fiscal note, if you're comfortable going through that as well. But committee members, if we have questions for the Department of Transportation or the Department of Tax Division, I think at this point, let's go through, if you have testimony, like invited testimony, a couple minutes that you want to talk about, or if you just want to go straight to the fiscal note, that's up to you.
Through the chair, my name is Mary Soroki, and I am the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities, and I am here to talk about the fiscal note. DOT gets, or the legislature appropriates to DOT all of the motor fuel tax and all of the aviation fuel tax. In this current fiscal year, we received about $33.3 million in motor fuel tax, about 4.7 in aviation tax, and we also used motor fuel tax receipts to the tune of about $3.6 million in the Alaska Marine Highway System budget. In FY 2020, the legislature appropriated all of the motor fuel tax, the 33.3 plus the 36, so just a little under $40 million of motor fuel tax to the Department of Transportation. However, the state is not going to collect $40 million in motor fuel tax this year, so it's anticipated that the state will collect about $38.8 million in motor fuel tax. So what that means, or what that meant for the Department of Transportation, is that when we developed our budget and our spending plan, we restricted $1.2 million of what you all thought was money we could use, but it isn't. So, and that's due to the consistent reduction in the amount of fuel that's being used as cars get more efficient. It is anticipated that next year there'll be about $2 million of unrealizable revenue that would be given to the Department of Transportation. If the motor fuel tax were increased, those funds would go to our highways aviation facilities. We would use it on the everyday maintenance activities of the department, which of course right now everybody thinks of in terms of snow removal, but it goes to chemicals for striping, for cutting bush so that you can see moose. It goes through for all of those kind of activities. So with that, I'm here for questions. Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's early in the process here this year, and we haven't started our budgetary process in the operating budget, but clearly there's an interest in maintenance, Madam Chairman, and the cost of maintenance, and I'd like the department to start putting together a decade and a half look back on maintenance dollars across the state, and we'll have Senator Bishop is on the subcommittee so it can tie in with him and have the department help us in that endeavor, and also why we shouldn't have an increment for the upcoming budget if this bill passes, in anticipation of this bill passing, so we can be more vigorous in our pothole patrol or snowplow removing or snow removing or snow plows or what have you around the state. And is the department going to be requesting an increment in anticipation of this bill being passed, or if this bill is passed?
Thank you, Senator Stedman. Would you like to respond to that?
Through the chair, Senator Stedman, we would look at the fiscal note as the vehicle for getting additional funding into the department's budget.
I think what Senator Stedman was sort of asking, hold on, just Senator Bishop, is more of a priority list of deferred maintenance. So you have in your fiscal note under the tax section, increased maintenance in the stations, increased winter maintenance, increased maintenance operations, a lot of maintenance and so forth. What would be interesting to see is a list of the assets. So the plows, the stations, even the blades, and which ones are in dire need of maintenance sooner rather than later, which ones can wait a year or so, and how much maintenance do each of these stations may need. I'd like to build upon Senator Stedman's comments as in which ones could we basically perhaps slough off. Do we need all of these? Are we over asset heavy? I think one of the things that this committee, because I've been on here for 3 years, what we've been asked is just a list of what the deferred maintenance for DOT really is. Did I capture that?
Yes, Madam Chairman, and also I'd like to just add a previous comment I made, because in earlier legislative processes a couple of years ago, we had a similar request in front of the legislature. And as I recall, the position of DOT, it would not be an additive increase on maintenance. We would just be increasing the tax on the citizens, and DOT's maintenance budget then would remain unchanged. And I think if we go forward and implement this tax increase, we need to be darn sure that the net benefit increase is going to what it's intended, which is increase our pothole patrol, our maintenance, snow removal, safety issues, and so on and so forth. It's just not displacing something else or putting funds in a direction somewhere else within the operating budget, and we sit here 2 years from now with virtually the same maintenance our expenditure structure.
Thank you, Chair Stedman. We have Senator Bishop has had his hand up, and then I saw Senator Wielechowski just now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also, Ms. Soroki, when you're looking at that look back, as Senator Stedman asked, I would ask to have the staffing levels put in there as well when you're having that look back, because the department has made strives with new equipment to lower the employee count, and with some of the specialized snow removal equipment that you have. So you know where I'm going with that question. So staffing levels. And to Senator Madam Chair's question on specifically talking about SEF, we did, as we know, we've got some language section in the operating budget, and your shop and my shop has been working together on the state equipment fleet report that they are in the works to ask your questions. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Senator Wielechowski.
Thank you. Does the administration support or oppose the bill?
At this point, we are here to provide information on the bill and its impacts on our department.
Follow-up, Senator Wielechowski.
Could you provide me with information whether the governor would veto this bill?
Through the chair, Senator Wielechowski, I will ask for I will ask that question.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have the fiscal note that you were in charge of is number 530, O&B component 530. Do you have anything more that you want to add to this? Because we have one more fiscal note to go over.
Through the chair now.
Okay, any further questions at all? Okay, thank you very much for being here. We have also online Mr. Brandon Spanos, Deputy Director, Department of Revenue Tax Division. The other O&B component number is 2476, the fiscal note. Mr. Spanos, are you online?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. This is Brandon Spanos, Deputy Director with the Tax Division, Department of Revenue, Tax Division. And our fiscal note basically shows the revenue impact of the bill if it were to pass, starting with fiscal year 21. And fiscal year 21, we would anticipate that the revenue would double from what our projection is in the revenue sources book. That projection is $33.8 million for FY21, and doubling that would bring the total to $67.6 million for that year. And then we anticipate that there'd be a 1 to 2% decline in fuel use year over year, which is the national average, and our fiscal note reflects that decrease through the 5 years reflected in the fiscal note. There would be a small cost to implement those changes in our tax revenue management system that we would pay to our contractor for development and testing of those changes, which also includes what we call Revenue Online, which is our outward-facing system for the taxpayers to file their returns and report their payments as well as refunds.
So, thank you, Mr. Spanos. And I see that you mentioned an estimated capital cost of about $50,000 for the tax revenue management system. My understanding is that the governor added $1.7 million in UGF in his operating budget, specifically for the tax revenue management system. This will be added to the fund, to the base budget. Do you need this extra $50,000 in the fiscal note if the $1.7 million budget increment is also added to your base budget for the TRMS?
Madam Co-Chair, thank you for that question. No, we would not need the additional fund. If the 1.65 is included in the base budget, that would be for changes like this.
Thank you. I think that as an ongoing operating expense, having to upgrade and change the TRMS, the tax revenue management system, it makes sense to have it in the budget where we can actually look at it and ask questions about it versus buried in a fiscal note. Senator Wielechowski.
Thank you. Can you just briefly explain at what point in the chain this tax is captured?
Through the chair, Senator Wielechowski, if I understand the question correctly, are you asking who's paying the tax? Where is it?
Yes.
Where is it paid?
Yeah. Is it the refiners, the wholesalers, is it the individual gas station? I'm just curious at what point it's actually who's actually taxed.
So through the chair, Senator Wielechowski, the distributor is taxed. So in Alaska, all the distributors, they have to get a license, and they're the ones that pay the tax. So the distributor is in a chain of distribution. They're the ones that sell it to the retail stations or to the villagers or the munis, and generally excise taxes are usually buried in the cost, so the final user wouldn't see it on a receipt because it's further up in the chain. So the retail store will buy it from the distributor. They'll generally pay the 8 cents more for the fuel, and then the distributor remits that tax to the state. But they're also essentially the payor of the tax.
So just
follow up, Senator Wielechowski.
We heard some testimony about some company going out and building their own tank, I guess, or having gas shipped up to a tank. Would they be considered a distributor in that situation, or would the outside company be considered the distributor?
So through the chair, Senator Wielechowski, there are allowances in our regulations for if you're buying fuel for a tax-off purpose. So let's say you're going to use all of your fuel for heating fuel. If you have a designated tank that is only used for heating fuel, then we allow the distributors to sell it tax-off. So it would be sold without that 8 cents. The user then has to sign a form that says that this will be used only for an exempt purpose, and then they take on the burden that if they end up using it for a taxable purpose, they're the taxpayer, and they would also have a penalty on that. So the distributor, as long as they have a certificate of use on file signed by the purchaser, then they can sell that fuel tax off but the distributor does need to have a reasonable belief that the fuel will be used for a tax-off purpose and needs to actually deliver it into that dedicated tank.
Senator Wielechowski.
Thank you, and I appreciate this information. I just don't know how the system works. But what are some types of exempt fuel uses, and do you have a rough estimate of how much is actually used for exempt purposes?
So through the chair, Senator Wielechowski, I can pull up the list of exempt fuel types. But no, we don't. That's not reported to us. We don't receive information from the distributors on their tax-off sales. We can go out and do an audit, and we do ask for that information during the course of an audit, but we don't have all the data to determine what the total exemptions are. I believe we have done estimates in the past on some in past legislation. I think when the surcharge was passed, I believe we had some estimates on what the cost for certain exemptions would be. So I could go back and try to locate that, but we don't have that data in front of us. Some of the exemptions are for heating fuel and federal government use, state government use, local government use, foreign fuel used in foreign flights. So if the flight is going to or returning from a foreign country, also fuel used in exports, charitable fuel used by charitable institutions, and there's a couple others. So fuel transfer between qualified dealers is also exempt.
So, Mr. Spanos, if you could find the previous information that you alluded to, that you did an estimate, hopefully it's not, outside a decade from now or from here, it'd be nice to see. But along that line, if you said municipal and state, would the ferry, assume we can get it up and running, would the ferry pay this marine fuels tax?
Madam Chair, I don't know the answer to that. I think they're, as a quasi-state government agency, may be exempt, but I have to follow up.
I think, we obviously have a tax now. Let's just find out whether they're paying it now. So we have Mary who came and joined us again. Do you have an answer to that?
Through the chair, the state ferry is exempt from paying that tax.
Thank you for that. Senator Stedman.
Well, I was going to, before she got away, if I could, Madam Chairman, just add to my previous request, when we're talking about deferred maintenance and the use of maintenance money for the last decade and a half, so the committee and the subcommittee can get a good feel for it, I'd like it also broken down by DOT region. We have northern region, coastal region, central region, because the committee, Madam Chairman, may have a different position than the administration, as referenced several years ago when the legislature put forward a substantial increase in maintenance dollars in the DOT that was not requested by the administration at the time. The legislature felt that it was needed and took effective action to address that. And I don't know what the status is going to be of the request, so don't misinterpret what I'm saying as far as that we're going to automatically increase maintenance and operation money. We just need to get a good feel for where each region of DOT stands, and they're probably not all going to be equal. I expect some regions to need more maintenance than others. As an example, the Dalton Highway. I know for sure that needs some maintenance dollars.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Stedman. Thank you very much, Mary. Any other questions for the bill sponsor? Okay. We will set SB15 aside for further review. Please let my office know as soon as possible if you have any concerns or amendments. So this concludes today's meeting. Our next meeting will be tomorrow at 9 a.m. We will be looking at SB104, the appropriation limit, fondly known as the spending cap. We are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hopefully you got a chance to call in and testify about SB115, the gas tax that they are trying to pass, do not hesitate to call, write, email, text, Facebook a message to them about what you think about them increasing the gas tax here in Alaska. Their proposition or proposal that they have on the table will be doubling the gas tax. For an average person like myself who relies on having my vehicle to go to job, to be able to fix things out there in this great state of Alaska, it will increase my ability to be able to do my job anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000 more a year. This is no different than what Mayor Berkowitz had done with his 10-cent gas. I no longer buy gas in Anchorage anymore due to the fact that I can't afford that gas price. It would mean that I would have to pass that price on to my customers, increasing the charges that I charge them for the services that I provide. Thank you again for tuning in today. Do not hesitate to share this post. Facebook squeals on you if you don't share. Thanks for paying it. Thanks for joining. Have a great day.